After 23 years, Nira slid divorce papers across our kitchen table like she was serving breakfast. The morning light caught her wedding ring as she pushed the manila folder toward me with 2 fingers, careful not to touch what she'd just delivered. "The girls helped me see the truth, Beck," she said, her voice carrying that lawyer tone she'd perfected over the years. "This isn't working anymore." I picked up the papers and flipped through them. Emotional neglect, unequal distribution of household labor, failure to contribute meaningfully to family decisions, the usual feminist playbook dressed up in legal language. "Interesting timing," I said, setting the documents down, right after Allie's women's studies final and Zoe's semester break. Nira's jaw tightened. They opened my eyes to patterns I'd been ignoring. Patterns. I nodded slowly, then reached for my phone. I photographed the service time stamp, the signature page, and Nira's face as she realized I was documenting everything. "Mind if I ask what patterns specifically?" "You know what you've done, Beck. Or rather, what you haven't done." Our daughters, Allie and Zoe, lingered in the doorway, clearly waiting for an opening. At 22 and 19, both were home from their costly colleges, full of newly formed ideas about systemic inequality and power structures. For weeks, they'd been hovering nearby, conferring quietly with their mother and directing unmistakably critical looks in my direction. "Dad never helps with anything," Allie had announced at dinner last week. "Mom does everything while he just exists." Zoe had nodded sagely, her freshman sociology coursework apparently making her an expert on family dynamics. "It's emotional labor, Dad. Look it up." Now here we were, the inevitable conclusion of their semester-long consciousness-raising campaign. I stood up from the table, tucking the papers under my arm. "I'll need some time to review these." "Take all the time you need," Nira said. "My lawyer says you have 30 days to respond." Her lawyer. Of course, she'd already retained counsel. Probably someone from her firm. Maybe that shark Liz Brennan who specialized in taking men to the cleaners. I walked to the door, then paused. "Just curious, when did you file these?" "Last Friday. 3 days ago, while I was working a double shift to finish the Morrison project ahead of schedule, while she was supposedly at her book club." "And the girls knew?" Nira's silence was answer enough. I left the house and drove to the construction site, my phone already buzzing with calls I wasn't ready to take. Instead, I parked in the empty lot and opened the glove compartment, pulling out a small notebook I'd been keeping for months. Because here's what Nira and her enlightened daughters didn't know. I'd been expecting this collision for a long time. The notebook contained dates, times, and details. Every school conference I'd attended alone because Nira was swamped at work. Every medical appointment I'd scheduled and driven to. Every permission slip I'd signed. Every tuition payment I'd processed. Every late-night emergency I'd handled while she slept soundly beside me. 23 years of receipts, literally and figuratively. I flipped to the back pages where I'd started tracking Nira's new habits. The mysterious Wednesday evening client dinners that never appeared on her calendar. The weekend trips to legal conferences in cities that didn't have any scheduled. The new phone she kept face down and password protected. My wife thought she was playing chess. Too bad she didn't realize I'd been carving the pieces for years. That night, I descended into what the girls mockingly called Dad's bunker, my basement workshop, where I kept my tools, my files, and my sanity. I pulled out our shared financial records, organized by year and cross-referenced with household management documents, school payment logs going back to kindergarten, medical consent forms with my signature, travel permissions for field trips and summer camps, insurance claims I'd filed, parent-teacher conference schedules I'd arranged, every birthday party invitation I'd RSVP'd to, every carpool I'd organized, every emergency contact form listing me as the primary. 2 decades of evidence that I'd been the family's operational backbone while Nira collected the credit. I printed everything and created an index, organizing it chronologically with timestamps and contact information for verification. Teachers who could confirm I'd been the one asking about homework policies. Doctors who knew me by name from 20 years of bringing the girls in for checkups. Vendors who dealt with me directly for household services and repairs. By morning, I had a comprehensive dossier that would make Nira's legal team weep. But that was just the opening move. I also had something else. A burner phone hidden in a box of Nira's old college books that she thought I'd never find. The text messages on it painted an interesting picture of my wife's recent activities. "Can't wait until this is over and we can be together properly," read one message to a contact labeled simply as J. "Beck suspects nothing. He's too busy feeling sorry for himself to notice anything," read another. "The girls are completely on my side. He'll never see this coming." J turned out to be Jared Baines, the slick real estate broker who'd sold us our house 15 years ago. The same Jared who'd been calling Nira's office regularly, according to the phone logs I'd quietly obtained. The same Jared who'd recently divorced his own wife in what the local gossip mill described as a messy situation. I sat back in my chair, studying the evidence spread across my workbench like blueprints for a demolition project. Nira was right about one thing. I'd never seen this coming. But she'd made a critical error in her calculations. She'd assumed I was the same man who'd married her 23 years ago, grateful, accommodating, eager to please. She'd forgotten that I was a construction foreman who specialized in controlled demolitions. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Mick, an ex-cop who now worked security at the Rusty Hammer, our local watering hole. "Heard about the papers. You okay?" I typed back, "Never better. Want to help me with a project?" "What kind of project?" "The kind that requires careful planning and perfect timing." There was a long pause before his response. "I'll bring the beer." I climbed the stairs from the basement as the sun was setting, carrying the manila folder Nira had given me and a thick binder of my own materials. She was in the living room with the girls, the three of them huddled around her laptop like conspirators planning a revolution. They looked up when I entered, their expressions ranging from defiant to nervous. "I've reviewed your filing," I said, setting both folders on the coffee table. "Interesting reading." Nira straightened her shoulders. "And?" "I'll be filing my response tomorrow, but first, I thought we should discuss your allegations in detail." I opened my binder and pulled out the index. "You claim I've shown emotional neglect and failed to contribute to family decisions. I'd like to match each of these claims to the documented record." Allie rolled her eyes. "Dad, this isn't a business meeting." "You're right," I said. "It's a legal proceeding, and in legal proceedings, evidence matters." I spread out the payment logs, the signed forms, the appointment schedules. 23 years of proof that I'd been the family's administrative backbone, laid out in chronological order. "Here's every school conference I attended," I said, pointing to a thick stack of papers. "Every medical appointment I scheduled, every permission slip I signed, every emergency I handled." Nira's face had gone pale. "Beck, what is this?" "Documentation, the kind that holds up in court." I pulled out another stack. "Here are written statements from teachers, doctors, and vendors confirming who they dealt with directly for family matters. Contact information included for verification." Zoe leaned forward, scanning the papers. You kept records of everything?" "Someone had to. Apparently it wasn't going to be your mother." I could see the wheels turning in Nira's head as she realized the implications. Her feminist narrative about my neglect was about to collide with 2 decades of contradictory evidence. "This doesn't change anything," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Actually, it changes everything." I pulled out the final document, my counterfiling, already prepared and ready for submission, especially when combined with my own allegations. I watched her face as she read the first page: adultery, financial deception, parental alienation, each charge backed by specific evidence and documentation. "You can't prove any of this," she said, but her hands were shaking. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Want to bet? The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock Nira had inherited from her mother. The same clock that had counted down 23 years of marriage, now marking time until its end. The mediation is scheduled for Friday, I said, gathering my papers. I suggest you prepare accordingly. As I headed back to the basement, I heard Allie whisper to her mother, "Mom, what if he's right?" I paused on the stairs, listening. "He's not right," Nira said, but her voice was barely audible. "He can't be." But I was right, and she was about to find out just how right. The collision was coming, and it was going to be spectacular. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of November weather that drains the color from everything. I met Nira at the mediation center downtown, a sterile office building where marriages are carefully taken apart by professionals. She'd brought Liz Brennan, just as I'd predicted. Liz was everything Nira aspired to be: sharp suit, sharper tongue, and a reputation for turning divorce proceedings into scorched earth campaigns. I'd brought my binder. The mediator was a soft-spoken woman named Margaret Chen, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. She reviewed our filings with the expression of someone trying to solve a particularly unpleasant puzzle. "Mrs. Derron," she began, "your petition alleges systematic emotional neglect and unequal distribution of household labor. Can you provide specific examples?" Nira launched into her prepared speech about my failures as a husband and father, how I'd checked out emotionally years ago, how she'd carried the mental load of running our household while I focused solely on my work, how our daughters had helped her recognize patterns of behavior she'd been too accommodating to address. Allie and Zoe sat in the corner, nodding along like backup singers. When Nira finished, Margaret turned to me. "Mr. Derron, how do you respond to these allegations?" I opened my binder and pulled out the index. I'd like each allegation to be matched against the documented record. For the next hour, I systematically dismantled every claim Nira had made. School conferences? I had attendance records showing I'd been present for 90% of them over 20 years. Medical appointments? Insurance forms with my signature as the responsible party? Household decisions? Email chains showing I'd researched and arranged everything from mortgage refinancing to home repairs. Margaret's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine surprise as the evidence mounted. "Mr. Derron," she said, "this is quite comprehensive documentation." "I believe in keeping good records," I said, "especially for important matters." Liz Brennan tried to interrupt several times, but Margaret held up her hand. "Let him finish." I pulled out the vendor statements, written confirmations from contractors, service providers, and school administrators about who they'd dealt with directly. 23 years of proof that I'd been the family's primary point of contact for everything that mattered. "Furthermore," I said, "I'd like to address my counter-allegations." That's when I played my ace. I pulled out printed copies of the text messages from Nira's burner phone, carefully redacted to remove explicit content, but leaving enough context to tell the story. Messages about secret meetings, complaints about our marriage, and discussions of post-divorce plans. Nira's face went white. "Where did you get those?" "From a device you left in our shared residence," I said calmly. "Legally accessible to me as a spouse and homeowner." Liz leaned over to whisper urgently in Nira's ear, but the damage was done. Margaret was reading through the messages with growing concern. "Mrs. Derron," Margaret said, "these communications suggest an ongoing extramarital relationship. Is this accurate?" The room fell silent. Allie and Zoe stared at their mother with expressions of dawning horror. That's not," Nira stammered. "It's a simple yes or no question," I said. Margaret set down the papers and removed her glasses. "I think we need a recess." During the break, I watched through the conference room window as Nira tried to explain herself to our daughters. Allie was crying. Zoe looked like she'd been slapped. Their feminist hero had just revealed herself to be a common cheater. When we reconvened, Margaret's tone had shifted noticeably. Mrs. Derron, in light of the evidence presented, I'm recommending significant revisions to your original petition. The allegations of neglect appear to be contradicted by substantial documentation. Liz Brennan made one last attempt to salvage the situation. Your Honor, emotional neglect isn't always reflected in administrative tasks. Counselor, Margaret interrupted, 20 years of school conferences, medical appointments, and household management suggest significant emotional investment. Combined with evidence of extramarital activity, I'm finding Mr. Derron's counter-allegations more credible. Nira stood up abruptly. I need some air. She walked out, followed by Liz and our daughters. Through the window, I watched them have what appeared to be a heated argument in the parking lot. Margaret turned to me. Mr. Derron, what are you seeking in terms of resolution? Fair distribution of assets based on actual contributions. Custody arrangement that reflects the girl's preferences, assuming they're based on accurate information. And a formal acknowledgement that the original allegations were unfounded. That seems reasonable. An hour later, Nira returned with red eyes and a defeated expression. The original petition was withdrawn. New terms were negotiated. The girls left early, unable to look at either of their parents. I filed my counterterms and closed my folder. The first collision was complete, but it was only the beginning. That evening, I met Mick at the Rusty Hammer. The bar was exactly what it sounded like. A blue-collar dive where construction workers, mechanics, and other members of the disappearing middle class gathered to complain about their lives over cheap beer. So how'd it go? Mick asked, sliding a bottle across the scarred wooden table. Better than expected. Turns out documentation beats accusations every time. And Nira? Learning that actions have consequences. Mick nodded slowly. He'd been through his own messy divorce 5 years earlier, courtesy of a wife who'd decided she deserved better than a cop's salary. What's next? I pulled out my phone and showed him the contact information I'd gathered for Jared Baines. Address, workplace, vehicle registration, daily routine. We're going to have a conversation with Nira's boyfriend. What kind of conversation? The educational kind. Jared worked out of a glass office building downtown, the kind of place where people wore expensive suits and sold dreams to suckers. His BMW was parked in a reserved spot near the entrance, gleaming under the parking lot lights. We waited until closing time, watching from Mick's pickup truck as employees filed out of the building. Jared emerged around 7, talking loudly on his phone about some deal he was closing. He was exactly what I'd expected. Mid-40s, artificially tan, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The kind of guy who'd never worked with his hands but thought that made him sophisticated. I walked over as he was unlocking his car. Jared Baines? He looked up, startled. Yeah, who's asking? Beck Derron, Nira's husband. His face went through several interesting expressions before settling on forced confidence. Look, man, I don't know what you think. I think you've been having an affair with my wife for the past 6 months. I think you encouraged her to file for divorce, and I think you assumed I was too stupid to figure it out. Jared glanced around the parking lot, probably looking for security cameras or witnesses. You're mistaken. Am I? I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the text message screenshots. Because this conversation you had with her last Tuesday suggests otherwise. His confidence evaporated like morning fog. What do you want? I want you to understand something, I said, stepping closer. You picked the wrong family to mess with. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. See, you thought you were dealing with some blue-collar loser who'd roll over and play victim, but I've been building things and tearing them down for 25 years. I know how to plan a project, and I know how to execute it properly. Jared backed against his car. I'll call the police. And tell them what? That I had a conversation with you in a public parking lot? I smiled. Go ahead. My best friend used to be a cop. He'll get a kick out of that. I leaned in close enough to smell his expensive cologne. Here's what's going to happen, Jared. You're going to stop seeing my wife. You're going to stop calling her. And you're going to find somewhere else to conduct your business. You can't make me... I can't make you do anything. But I can make your life very uncomfortable if you don't. I straightened up and headed back to Mick's truck, leaving Jared standing next to his BMW looking like he'd been hit by a freight train. Think that'll work? Mick asked as we drove away. Probably not. Guys like that don't scare easily, but it was worth a try. And if he doesn't back off? I smiled. Then we moved to Phase 2. Phase 2 began the next morning when I made a few phone calls to contacts in the local business community. Nothing illegal or unethical, just sharing information about Jared's business practices with people who might find it interesting. It turned out Jared had a reputation for cutting corners on property inspections and overselling properties to buyers who couldn't afford them. The kind of behavior that made him money in the short term, but created problems down the road. By Wednesday, 3 of his pending deals had fallen through when buyers got cold feet after anonymous tips about potential issues with their purchases. Tips that suggested they might want to get second opinions on inspections and financing. By Friday, Jared's office had received visits from the Better Business Bureau and the State Real Estate Commission, following up on routine complaints about business practices. I didn't have to do anything illegal or even unethical. I just had to make sure the right information reached the right people at the right time. The construction business had taught me that sometimes the best way to bring something down isn't with explosives. It's by removing the right support beam and letting gravity do the work. Jared called me Saturday morning, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. I know what you're doing, Derron. I'm having coffee and reading the newspaper. What are you doing? You're sabotaging my business. I'm not sabotaging anything. I'm just making sure people have access to complete information before they make important decisions. This is harassment. This is capitalism. If your business practices can't stand up to scrutiny, maybe you should consider a career change. There was a long pause. What do you want? I want you to leave my family alone. And if I do? Then you can go back to selling overpriced houses to unsuspecting buyers without any interference from me. Another pause. And Nira? Nira can make her own choices, but she's going to make them based on accurate information about who she's dealing with. I hung up and went back to my coffee. Through the kitchen window, I could see Nira in the garden, pulling weeds with the kind of aggressive energy that suggested she was imagining they were something else. She'd been quiet since the mediation, spending most of her time either at work or locked in her room. The girls had been avoiding both of us, processing the revelation that their feminist awakening had been orchestrated by a cheating mother and directed at an innocent father. My phone buzzed with a text from Allie. Can we talk? I texted back, of course. When and where? Coffee shop on Main Street, 1 hour. I found her at a corner table, looking smaller and younger than her 22 years. She'd been crying. Her eyes were red and her makeup was smudged. I'm sorry, Dad, she said before I'd even sat down. For what? For everything. For believing Mom without asking for your side. For treating you like you were the problem. For being so stupid. I reached across the table and took her hand. You weren't stupid, honey. You were manipulated by someone you trusted. But I should have known better. All those times you drove me to soccer practice, helped me with homework, came to my games. How could I forget all that? Because your mother is very good at telling convincing stories, and because you wanted to believe you were fighting for something important. Allie wiped her eyes with a napkin. Zoe feels terrible too. We both do. Where is Zoe? At home, crying in her room. She's embarrassed about the things she said to you. I squeezed her hand. Tell her she doesn't need to be embarrassed. Tell her I love both of you, and nothing that's happened changes that. What about Mom? That was the question I'd been dreading. What about her? Are you going to forgive her? I considered my words carefully. Your mother made choices, Allie. She chose to have an affair. She chose to turn you girls against me instead of addressing her concerns directly. She chose to file for divorce based on false allegations rather than trying to work on our marriage. But you still love her, right? I love the woman I married 23 years ago, but I'm not sure that woman exists anymore. Allie nodded slowly. What happens now? Now we all learn to live with the consequences of the choices we've made. I drove home to find Nira waiting in the driveway, her face set in the determined expression she wore when she was about to do something she didn't want to do. We need to talk, she said. About what? About ending this. About finding a way to move forward that doesn't destroy what's left of our family. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was still beautiful, still the woman who'd caught my eye at a college party 25 years ago. But there was something different now, something harder around the edges. What did you have in mind? Jared's out of the picture, she said quietly. I ended it. Because you wanted to, or because I made it inconvenient? She flinched. Because I realized what I was throwing away. And what's that? 23 years, 2 daughters, a life we built together. I shook my head. Nira, you didn't just cheat on me. You turned our daughters against me. You filed false allegations in court. You tried to destroy my reputation to cover your own guilt. I know I messed up. You didn't mess up. You made calculated decisions designed to hurt me as much as possible. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. So what are you saying? That it's over? That there's no way back? I looked at our house. The house I'd maintained and improved for 15 years. The house where we'd raised our daughters. The house that had been the center of our life together. I'm saying that some collisions change everything, Nira. And this is one of them. The truth was, I'd already made my decision. The marriage was over, had been over the moment she'd chosen another man over our family. But the reckoning wasn't complete yet. There were still accounts to settle. The annual Harvest Festival was Millbrook's biggest social event, a weekend celebration that brought together everyone from construction workers to bank presidents. Main Street was closed to traffic, lined with booths selling everything from homemade pies to handcrafted furniture. It was also the perfect venue for what I had planned. I'd spent the week making careful preparations, phone calls to old friends, casual conversations with neighbors, strategic mentions of certain facts to certain people. By Saturday morning, half the town was buzzing with rumors about the Derron family drama. Rita Kowalski, our 70-year-old neighbor and the town's unofficial news network, had been particularly helpful. One coffee-fueled conversation on her front porch had been worth more than a full-page newspaper ad. I always wondered about those late nights, she'd told me, shaking her head. A woman doesn't start dressing fancy for grocery shopping unless she's got somewhere else to be. The festival opened at 10. By 11, I was working the crowd like a politician, stopping at every booth to chat with vendors I'd done business with over the years. The conversation always followed the same pattern. Sorry to hear about your troubles, Beck. Thanks, Jim. Turns out things weren't quite what they seemed. How's that? Well, you know how it is. Sometimes people see what they want to see instead of what's really there. By noon, the story had spread through the festival like smoke through a house fire. Beck Derron wasn't the neglectful husband everyone had heard about. Beck Derron was the guy who'd been holding his family together while his wife was running around with some real estate smooth talker. Nira arrived around 1 o'clock with the girls, clearly hoping to do some damage control. She'd dressed carefully, conservative outfit, minimal makeup, the picture of a respectable small-town mother. Too bad her reputation had arrived before she did. I watched from the beer tent as she moved through the crowd, noticing how conversations stopped when she approached, how people found excuses to be somewhere else. The social isolation was swift and brutal, the way it always is in small towns when someone crosses an unforgivable line. The girls noticed it too. Allie kept glancing around nervously, while Zoe moved closer to her mother like a protective shield. They were learning that their mother's choices had consequences for them as well. At 2 o'clock, the festival's main event began, the community awards ceremony. Local business owners, volunteers, and civic leaders were recognized for their contributions to the town. I'd been invited to present the award for Outstanding Community Service. I took the stage as the crowd gathered around the bandstand, looking out at faces I'd known for decades, construction workers I'd supervised, neighbors whose pipes I'd fixed, parents whose kids had played with mine. "Good afternoon, everyone," I began. "It's an honor to be here today, celebrating the people who make Millbrook such a special place to live." I spotted Nira in the crowd, her face tense with apprehension. She knew me well enough to recognize when I was up to something. "Before I present this award, I'd like to take a moment to thank some special people in my own life," I continued. "People who've supported me through some challenging times recently." I pulled out a folded piece of paper, as if I were reading from prepared notes. "I want to thank my neighbor Rita Kowalski, who brought me casseroles when I was going through my divorce proceedings. I want to thank my friend Mick Sullivan, who listened when I needed someone to talk to. And I want to thank all of you who reached out when you heard about the false allegations that were made against me." A murmur went through the crowd. False allegations was a loaded phrase in a town where everyone knew everyone else's business. You see, sometimes we learn that the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us deepest, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the festival speakers. Sometimes we discover that 23 years of marriage, 20 years of raising children together, and decades of building a life can be thrown away for the excitement of sneaking around with someone else's husband. Nira's face had gone pale. She started pushing through the crowd toward the exit, but people were packed too tightly around the bandstand. "But I've learned something important through this experience," I continued. "I've learned that the truth has a way of coming out, no matter how carefully people try to hide it. And I've learned that this community values honesty, loyalty, and integrity above all else." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This was better than any soap opera. "So when someone tries to destroy your reputation to cover their own guilt, when they turn your children against you to justify their betrayal, when they file false legal documents to steal what you've worked for, well, that's when you find out who your real friends are." I folded the paper and put it back in my pocket. The truth is, I'm grateful for everything that's happened, because now I know exactly where I stand and exactly who I can count on. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. I presented the Community Service Award to Margaret Chen, the librarian who'd organized the town's literacy program, then stepped down from the stage to a line of people wanting to shake my hand. Nira had vanished, along with Allie and Zoe. But Jared Baines was still there, standing near the funnel cake booth, with the expression of a man watching his world collapse in real time. I walked over to him, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. "Enjoying the festival, Jared?" He looked around nervously, aware that dozens of people were watching our interaction. "Look, Derron, I don't want any trouble." "Trouble? Why would there be trouble? This is a community celebration." "You know what I mean." I smiled. "Actually, I don't. Why don't you explain it to everyone?" The circle of onlookers had grown larger. Jared was trapped in the center of it like an animal in a cage. I think there's been a misunderstanding," he stammered. "What kind of misunderstanding?" "About me and about the situation with my wife, you mean?" Jared's face flushed red. It's not what people think." "What do people think, Jared?" He looked around desperately, but there was no escape. Every face in the crowd was focused on him, waiting for an answer. "I think I should go," he said finally. "Probably a good idea," I agreed. Small towns can be uncomfortable for people who don't respect community values. Jared pushed through the crowd and headed for the parking area, leaving behind a wake of whispered conversations and knowing looks. By evening, his humiliation would be the talk of every dinner table in town. I spent the rest of the afternoon accepting condolences and support from friends and neighbors. The narrative had been established and reinforced. Beck Derron was the wronged party, the victim of a cheating wife and her manipulative boyfriend. It was almost too easy. That evening, I found Nira waiting in our kitchen when I got home. She'd been crying, her makeup smeared, and her carefully chosen outfit wrinkled. "How could you do that to me?" she asked. "Do what?" "Humiliate me in front of the entire town." I sat down across from her at the same table where she'd served me divorce papers a week earlier. "I didn't humiliate you, Nira. I told the truth. You destroyed my reputation. You destroyed your reputation when you chose to have an affair. I just made sure people had accurate information about what happened." She wiped her eyes with a tissue. "The girls are mortified. Allie's friends from college are asking questions. Zoe doesn't want to go back to school because everyone will know." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to cheat on your husband." "I made a mistake, Beck. One mistake in 23 years. It wasn't a mistake, Nira. It was a series of deliberate choices. You chose to start an affair. You chose to lie about it. You chose to manipulate our daughters. You chose to file false allegations against me. Those weren't mistakes, they were calculated decisions." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the kitchen floor. "So this is it? This is your revenge, turning the whole town against me?" "This isn't revenge," I said calmly. "This is accountability. You wanted a divorce based on false allegations. You wanted to paint me as a neglectful husband and father. You wanted to take half of everything I'd worked for while running off with your boyfriend. And now everyone knows the truth, including our daughters." Nira walked to the window, staring out at the garden she'd tended for 15 years. "What happens now?" "Now you live with the consequences of your choices." "And us? Is there any chance of fixing this?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to find some trace of the woman I'd fallen in love with. But all I could see was a stranger who'd been living in my house, eating at my table, and planning my destruction. "Some things can't be fixed, Nira. Some collisions are too severe." She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I'll stay at my sister's tonight. Give us both some space to think." "That's probably best." After she left, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat on the back porch, watching the sun set over the town where I'd lived for 20 years. The festival was winding down, but I could still hear music drifting from Main Street. My phone buzzed with a text from Allie. "Dad, are you okay?" I typed back, "I'm fine, sweetheart. How are you and Zoe?" Confused, angry, embarrassed, Mom's at Aunt Linda's crying. "I'm sorry you had to go through that today." Are you really sorry, though? Or was that the point? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. The point was making sure people knew the truth. I'm sorry you got caught in the crossfire. What happens next? I don't know yet. But that wasn't entirely true. I knew exactly what happened next, because I'd been planning it for days. The public humiliation was just the opening act. The real show was about to begin. Sunday morning brought the kind of gray, drizzling rain that makes everything look defeated. I was in my workshop, organizing tools and reviewing blueprints for the Morrison project, when my phone rang. "Beck, it's Margaret Chen from the Mediation Center. I'm calling to inform you that Mrs. Derron's attorney has requested an emergency hearing." "On what grounds?" "They're claiming harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress based on yesterday's events at the festival." I almost laughed. I gave a speech thanking people for their support. How is that harassment? "They're arguing that your public statements constituted defamation and were designed to damage Mrs. Derron's reputation in the community." "Did they provide any evidence that my statements were false?" There was a pause. "No, they did not." "Then I'll see them in court." I hung up and called my own attorney, Tom Brennan, Liz's ex-husband, and a man who knew exactly how his former wife operated. "She's desperate," Tom said, after I explained the situation. Public humiliation cases are notoriously hard to prove, especially when the defendant can demonstrate that their statements were truthful. So we're good? Better than good. This actually helps your case because it shows a pattern of using the legal system to harass and intimidate rather than address legitimate grievances. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning. That gave me Monday to prepare and to implement the next phase of my plan. I started with a visit to Jared's office building. His BMW wasn't in its usual spot, and the receptionist informed me that Mr. Baines was taking some personal time. Interesting. I drove to his apartment complex, a upscale development on the north side of town where young professionals paid premium rent for granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. His car was there, parked under a carport that didn't quite hide the damage someone had done to it over the weekend. All 4 tires had been slashed. The word cheater was spray-painted across the driver's side door in bright red letters. The windshield was spiderwebbed with cracks. I pulled out my phone and took pictures, then called Mick. "Someone had a busy weekend," I said when he answered. "What do you mean?" "Jared's car looks like it went through a blender." "Huh, that's unfortunate. Vandalism is such a problem these days." "Any idea who might have done something like that?" "Could have been anyone, really. A lot of people in this town don't appreciate homewreckers." I smiled. Mick's alibi would be ironclad, just like mine. We'd both been at the Rusty Hammer until closing time Sunday night, with dozens of witnesses to prove it. Think I should report it to the police? As a concerned citizen? Absolutely. Wouldn't want Jared to think nobody cares about his problems. I called the police station and reported the vandalism, giving them Jared's address and a detailed description of the damage. Officer Martinez, a young cop who'd grown up in town, took the report with barely concealed amusement. "We'll look into it, Mr. Derron. Though between you and me, this kind of thing happens sometimes when people upset the community. I'm sure Jared will appreciate your thorough investigation." "Oh, we'll be thorough. Might take a while, though. These cases can be real complicated." By Monday afternoon, word of Jared's automotive troubles had spread through town faster than news of a lottery winner. The general consensus seemed to be that he'd gotten off easy. Rita Kowalski called me around dinner time with an update. "That real estate boy's been asking around about moving companies," she reported. "Seems to think a change of scenery might be good for his health." Can't imagine why. Also heard his boss isn't too happy about all the negative attention. Apparently, some clients have been asking uncomfortable questions about business practices. People do like to talk. Indeed they do. "Oh, and Beck, your wife stopped by earlier looking for you." "What did she want?" "Didn't say. But she looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days." I found Nira waiting in our driveway when I got home, sitting in her car with the engine running. She rolled down the window when I approached. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "About calling off your dogs." "I don't have any dogs." "Someone destroyed Jared's car last night. Someone's been calling his clients with concerns about his business practices. Someone's been spreading rumors that are ruining his reputation." I shrugged. "Sounds like the community is expressing its opinion about his character." "This has to stop, Beck." "What has to stop?" "The harassment, the intimidation, the campaign to destroy him." "Nira, I haven't harassed or intimidated anyone. I haven't destroyed anything. I've simply made sure that people have access to accurate information about the situation." "You're splitting hairs." "I'm following the law. There's a difference." She turned off the engine and got out of the car, her face set in the determined expression she wore when she was about to make a legal argument. "I know you're angry," she said. "I know I hurt you. But this vendetta against Jared isn't helping anyone. It's not a vendetta, it's cause and effect. He's talking about leaving town, Beck. Is that what you want?" "What I want is for people to face the consequences of their actions." "And what about the girls? They're caught in the middle of this. The girls are learning that choices have consequences. That's not necessarily a bad lesson. Nira stepped closer, her voice dropping to the pleading tone she used when she wanted something important. Please, Beck, for the sake of our family, for the sake of everything we built together, please just let this go. I looked at her for a long moment, remembering the woman who'd promised to love, honor, and cherish me 23 years ago. The woman who'd held my hand during my father's funeral. The woman who'd celebrated with me when I got my contractor's license. Some things can't be let go, Nira. Some betrayals are too deep. So this is permanent? This war you're waging? I'm not waging war. I'm defending myself. She got back in her car and rolled up the window, but I could see her crying as she drove away. Tuesday's hearing was a masterclass in legal overreach. Liz Brennan presented a case based entirely on speculation and emotional appeals, arguing that my festival speech had been designed to humiliate and ostracize her client. Tom Brennan methodically destroyed every argument. Your Honor, my client made truthful statements about his personal situation to a supportive community. He thanked people for their support during a difficult time. He expressed gratitude for learning who his real friends are. None of these statements were false, defamatory, or inappropriate. But the intent was clearly to damage Mrs. Derron's reputation, Liz argued. The intent was to thank people for their support. If Mrs. Derron's reputation was damaged, it was damaged by her own actions, not by my client's truthful statements about them. Margaret Chen looked tired, like a referee in a boxing match that had gone too many rounds. Mrs. Brennan, do you have any evidence that Mr. Derron's statements were false? The issue isn't whether they were false, Your Honor. The issue is whether they were made with malicious intent. Mr. Brennan? Tom stood up. Your Honor, truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims. My client cannot be held liable for stating facts about his own marriage and divorce proceedings, regardless of how those facts might reflect on the other party. Furthermore, Tom continued, this appears to be a pattern of using the legal system to harass and intimidate my client. First, false allegations of neglect and emotional abuse. Now, frivolous claims of defamation for truthful statements. This is exactly the kind of vexatious litigation that courts are designed to prevent. Margaret Chen nodded slowly. I'm going to grant Mr. Derron's motion to dismiss. Mrs. Brennan, your client's reputation was damaged by her own actions, not by truthful statements about those actions. Your Honor, furthermore, I'm issuing a warning about frivolous filings. Any future motions in this case had better be supported by substantial evidence and legal precedent. Liz gathered her papers with the expression of someone who'd just been publicly spanked. Nira sat beside her, staring at the table. As we left the courthouse, Tom pulled me aside. Beck, you're winning this thing hands down, but be careful about how far you push it. What do you mean? I mean that revenge has a way of consuming the people who pursue it. Don't let your anger turn you into something you don't want to be. I nodded, but I wasn't sure I agreed. Sometimes anger was the only thing that kept you moving forward. Sometimes revenge was just another word for justice. That evening, I got a call from Officer Martinez. Mr. Derron, we've completed our investigation into the vandalism at Mr. Baines' apartment. Find anything useful? Unfortunately, no. No witnesses, no fingerprints, no security cameras in that area. Whoever did it was very careful. That's too bad. Yeah, real shame. Oh, and Mr. Derron? Mr. Baines has decided not to pursue the matter further, says he's planning to relocate for business reasons. I'm sure the town will miss his contributions to the community. I'm sure we will. I hung up and poured myself a drink, then walked out to the back porch to watch the sunset. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled clean and fresh, like the world had been washed clean of something unpleasant. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Dad, can we talk? Just you and me? I typed back, of course. When and where? Tomorrow after school? The coffee shop? I'll be there. I spent the rest of the evening in my workshop, organizing tools and planning the next day's work. But my mind kept drifting to the conversation with Zoe, wondering what she wanted to say. The truth was, I'd been so focused on my war with Nira and Jared that I'd lost sight of what really mattered, my relationship with my daughters. Tomorrow, I'd start focusing on rebuilding what could be rebuilt. But first, I had one more score to settle. Wednesday afternoon found me sitting across from Zoe at the same coffee shop where I'd met with Allie the week before. My younger daughter looked older somehow, like the events of the past 2 weeks had aged her beyond her 19 years. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened," she began, stirring her latte nervously. "About Mom, about you, about the things Allie and I said. And I realize we were really unfair to you. We bought into this narrative about patriarchal oppression and emotional labor without actually looking at our own family." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You were trying to support your mother. That's not wrong. But we were wrong about the facts. We accused you of things that weren't true. Your mother can be very persuasive when she wants to be." Zoe nodded. She painted this picture of you as this distant, uninvolved father who left all the real work to her. But when I actually thought about it, really thought about it, I remembered all the times you drove me to practice, helped me with homework, came to my games. I remember those times too. Why didn't you defend yourself when we were attacking you? I considered the question carefully. Because I hoped you'd figure it out on your own. Because I didn't want to put you in the position of having to choose sides between your parents. But we chose sides anyway. We chose wrong. You chose based on the information you had. That's not your fault. Zoe wiped her eyes with a napkin. What's going to happen now? With you and Mom, I mean. I honestly don't know. Too much has happened. Too much trust has been broken. And with Jared? Jared's not my problem anymore. He's leaving town, and your mother's relationship with him is over. Because you destroyed him? I looked at my daughter, seeing so much of myself in her serious expression and direct questions. Because he discovered that actions have consequences, I said finally. Because this community doesn't tolerate people who destroy families. Did you vandalize his car? No. Do you know who did? I have suspicions, but no proof. Zoe nodded slowly. He deserved it. Maybe, but that's not for me to decide. We talked for another hour about college, about her plans for the future, about how we could rebuild our relationship. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Maybe the family could be salvaged, even if the marriage couldn't. That hope lasted until I found Nira waiting in my workshop. She was sitting at my workbench, looking through the files I'd compiled during our divorce proceedings. The evidence of her affair, the documentation of my contributions to our family, the financial records that would determine how our assets were divided. Interesting reading? I asked. She looked up with red-rimmed eyes. You've been planning this for months, haven't you? Planning what? This whole campaign. The documentation, the public humiliation, the systematic destruction of everyone who crossed you. I sat down across from her, the same workbench where I'd planned home improvements and helped the girls with school projects now serving as a conference table for the end of our marriage. I've been protecting myself and my interests, yes. You've been destroying lives. I've been revealing the truth. There's a difference. Nira stood up and began pacing around the small room, her lawyer instincts taking over. Jared's leaving town because you made his life unbearable. His business is ruined, his reputation is destroyed, and he's afraid for his safety. Jared's leaving town because he made poor choices and the community responded accordingly. You orchestrated the community response. I provided information. People drew their own conclusions. She stopped pacing and turned to face me. What do you want, Beck? What's your endgame here? I want a fair divorce settlement based on actual contributions to our marriage. I want custody arrangements that reflect reality rather than feminist theory. And I want acknowledgement that I was a good husband and father who was wronged by people he trusted. And then what? Do we all just move on like nothing happened? Some things can't be undone, Nira. Some betrayals are permanent. She sat back down, her shoulders sagging with defeat. I know I made mistakes. Stop. I held up my hand. Don't call them mistakes. Mistakes are accidental. What you did was deliberate. Fine. I made deliberate choices that hurt you and our family. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't rebuild 23 years of trust. So there's no path forward? No way to salvage anything from this? I looked around my workshop at the tools I'd used to build and repair things for 2 decades. Some things could be fixed with the right tools and enough patience. Others were too damaged to be worth saving. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe with time, maybe with therapy, maybe with a lot of work. But right now, I can't even look at you without seeing the woman who tried to destroy me. Nira nodded, tears streaming down her face. The girls want us to try counseling. The girls want their family back. I understand that. But wanting something and being able to achieve it are different things. Will you at least consider it? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Tom Brennan's name appeared on the screen. I need to take this, I said, answering the call. Beck, we have a problem. Liz Brennan just filed a motion claiming you've been harassing and intimidating witnesses. What witnesses? Jared Baines. Apparently, he's claiming that you and your associates have been threatening him, vandalizing his property, and interfering with his business relationships. I looked at Nira, who was listening intently to my side of the conversation. That's ridiculous. I haven't threatened anyone or vandalized anything. Can you prove that? I can prove where I was when his car was vandalized. I can prove that I haven't made any threats, but I can't prove I didn't make phone calls or have conversations with people about his business practices. We need to meet tomorrow morning to prepare our response. Fine, 9 o'clock? Make it 8. This is serious, Beck. I hung up and found Nira staring at me with a mixture of fear and anger. This has to stop, she said. Whatever you're doing, whatever you've set in motion, it has to stop before someone gets hurt. I haven't set anything in motion. I've simply allowed the truth to be known. The truth? The truth is that you've become obsessed with revenge. The truth is that you're destroying people's lives because your pride was hurt. My pride? I stood up, anger flooding through me for the first time in our conversation. You think this is about pride? Isn't it? This is about 23 years of marriage that you threw away for a few months of excitement. This is about our daughters being turned against me based on lies. This is about you trying to steal half of everything I've worked for while painting me as an abusive husband. I never said you were abusive. Emotional neglect, failure to contribute, unequal distribution of labor. Those are abuse allegations, Nira, and they were lies. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. I know they were wrong. Then why did you make them? Because I was angry, because I felt guilty, because Jared convinced me that you were holding me back from my potential. And now? Now I realize that Jared was manipulating me just like I was manipulating you. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. It's too late for realizations, Nira. Is it? Some collisions are too severe, some damage is too extensive. We sat in silence for several minutes, 23 years of marriage hanging between us like a bridge that had been burned beyond repair. Finally, Nira stood up. I'll talk to Liz about withdrawing the harassment claims. Why? Because they're not true. Because I'm tired of fighting. Because I want to try to salvage something from this mess. And Jared? Jared can take care of himself. He's a grown man who made his own choices. After she left, I called Mick. We might have a problem, I said, explaining about the harassment allegations. What kind of problem? The kind where someone might start asking uncomfortable questions about what happened to Jared's car. Well, that would be unfortunate. Good thing we were both at the Hammer Sunday night with about 50 witnesses. Good thing. Beck? Yeah? Maybe it's time to let this thing wind down. You've made your point. I considered his words as I looked around my workshop, at the evidence of a marriage that was ending and a family that was broken. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to let the collision settle and see what was left standing. But first, I had one final move to make. The final hearing was scheduled for Friday morning, exactly 3 weeks after Nira had served me with divorce papers. I arrived at the courthouse early, carrying a new binder that contained the complete record of our marriage's dissolution. Tom Brennan met me in the hallway outside the courtroom, looking grim. Liz withdrew the harassment allegations this morning, he said. Apparently, Nira convinced her they couldn't be substantiated. That's good news. Yes and no. It means we can focus on the actual divorce proceedings, but it also means Liz is going to come at us hard on the financial settlement. Let her come. We entered the courtroom to find Nira already seated with her attorney, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. She'd lost weight over the past 3 weeks, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. Allie and Zoe sat in the gallery, both looking uncomfortable with being forced to witness the formal end of their parents' marriage. Margaret Chen called the hearing to order and reviewed the remaining issues: division of assets, spousal support, and custody arrangements for our adult daughter's college expenses and health insurance. Mrs. Brennan, please present your client's position on asset division. Liz stood up with a thick folder of her own. Your Honor, Mrs. Derron is seeking an equitable distribution of marital assets, including 50% of the family home, retirement accounts, and business assets. Mr. Brennan? Tom stood and opened my binder. Your Honor, my client is willing to accept an equitable distribution based on actual contributions to the marriage, as documented in these records. For the next hour, we went through the evidence I'd been compiling for months. Financial records showing that I'd contributed 80% of our household income over 20 years. Documentation proving that I'd handled the majority of household administration and child-rearing responsibilities. Records of home improvements and maintenance that I'd performed personally, adding value to our property. Furthermore, Tom continued, my client purchased the family home using inheritance funds that predate the marriage, making it separate property under state law. Liz objected, but Margaret Chen reviewed the deed and inheritance documentation. The house was mine, bought with money from my father's estate before Nira and I were married. Mrs. Brennan, do you have evidence contradicting these financial records? Your Honor, the issue isn't just financial contributions. Mrs. Derron provided emotional support, household management, and childcare that enabled Mr. Derron to focus on his career. Tom smiled. Your Honor, my client's documentation shows that he handled the majority of household management and childcare responsibilities. If anything, Mrs. Derron's career was enabled by my client's contributions to the family. The hearing continued for another 2 hours, but the outcome was becoming clear. Every allegation Nira had made was contradicted by documentary evidence. Every claim about my neglect was disproven by 20 years of records. When Margaret Chen called for a recess, I found myself alone with Nira in the hallway. You really did plan this whole thing, didn't you? She said. I documented our marriage as it happened. The planning was in the organization and presentation. Why? Why keep such detailed records? Because I'm a contractor. Documentation protects you when people try to claim you didn't do the work. She laughed bitterly. So our marriage was just another construction project to you? Our marriage was the most important project of my life. That's why I kept such careful records of my contributions to it. And now? Now those records are protecting me from false allegations. When we reconvened, Margaret Chen delivered her ruling. Based on the evidence presented, I find that Mr. Derron contributed significantly more to this marriage than initially alleged. The family home will remain his separate property. Retirement accounts will be divided 60-40 in Mr. Derron's favor, reflecting his greater financial contributions. No spousal support will be awarded. Liz started to object, but Margaret Chen held up her hand. Furthermore, I want to address the allegations made in Mrs. Derron's original filing. The evidence clearly shows that Mr. Derron was an engaged and responsible husband and father. The claims of emotional neglect and unequal labor distribution appear to have been made in bad faith. Nira closed her eyes, accepting the final collapse of her legal strategy. Both parties will share college expenses for their daughters equally. Mr. Derron will maintain health insurance coverage until the girls graduate. The divorce is granted on grounds of irreconcilable differences. It was over. As we gathered our papers, Allie and Zoe approached me. "Dad," Allie said, "we're sorry for everything. You don't need to apologize for anything." "Yes, we do," Zoe said. "We believed things that weren't true. We said things that were hurtful. We chose sides without understanding the whole story." I hugged both of them, feeling like I was getting my daughters back for the first time in months. "What matters is that you understand now," I said. "What matters is that we can move forward together." "What about Mom?" Allie asked. I looked over at Nira, who was speaking quietly with Liz Brennan. She looked defeated, broken, like someone who'd gambled everything and lost. "Your mother made choices that have consequences, but she's still your mother, and you should maintain a relationship with her." "Will you ever forgive her?" Zoe asked. "I don't know. Maybe someday. But right now, I need to focus on rebuilding my own life." That evening, I met Mick at the Rusty Hammer for what had become our traditional post-crisis drink. The bar was crowded with the usual Friday night crowd, construction workers, mechanics, and other blue-collar folks celebrating the end of another week. "So, how does it feel?" Mick asked, sliding a beer across the table. "How does what feel?" "Winning. Getting everything you wanted." I considered the question as I looked around the bar, at faces that had become familiar over the years. People who worked with their hands, who understood the value of honest labor, who respected loyalty and despised betrayal. "I didn't get everything I wanted," I said finally. "I wanted my marriage to work. I wanted my family to stay together. I wanted to grow old with the woman I married 23 years ago. But you got justice. I got accountability. There's a difference." "Is there?" Justice would have been Nira realizing what she was throwing away before she threw it away. Justice would have been my daughters trusting me enough to ask for my side of the story. Justice would have been a marriage that survived its challenges instead of being destroyed by them. Mick nodded slowly. "So what did you get?" "I got the truth. I got my reputation back. I got my daughter's respect. And I got proof that I was a good husband and father, regardless of what anyone claimed. And Nira? Nira got exactly what she asked for, a divorce based on irreconcilable differences. She just didn't get the financial windfall she was expecting." "What about Jared?" I smiled for the first time all day. Jared learned that small towns have long memories and strong opinions about people who break up families. "He's really leaving. Truck was loaded this morning, according to Rita. Apparently his business relationships became complicated." "Shame." "Indeed." We drank in comfortable silence for a while, watching the crowd and listening to conversations about work, family, and the small dramas that make up most people's lives. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said eventually. "What's that?" If Nira had just talked to me about her unhappiness, if she'd suggested counseling or separation or even divorce without the lies and manipulation, we probably could have worked something out. We could have ended things with dignity and respect. But she didn't. But she didn't. She chose deception, betrayal, and character assassination instead. And now? Now she's learning that some choices can't be undone. Some collisions are too severe to walk away from unchanged. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it to find a message from Jared. "I hope you're satisfied. You destroyed my life over a relationship that was already ending." I showed the message to Mick, who laughed. "What are you going to tell him?" I typed back, "I didn't destroy your life. I simply made sure people knew who they were dealing with. The destruction was your choice." His response came quickly. "This isn't over." I typed, "Yes, it is. You're leaving town, remember? Fresh start, new opportunities. Try not to break up any families in your next location." I put the phone away and raised my beer. "To accountability." Mick raised his own glass. "To accountability." As we drank, I reflected on the past 3 weeks and everything that had changed. My marriage was over, but my relationship with my daughters was stronger than ever. My reputation had been attacked, but it had emerged intact. My trust had been betrayed, but I'd learned who my real friends were. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd thought, that I could defend myself when attacked, that I could fight back when cornered, that I could survive the collision and keep moving forward. The bar was getting louder as the evening progressed, filled with laughter and conversation and the comfortable noise of people enjoying themselves. I looked around at faces that had become familiar over the years, people who'd supported me through the worst 3 weeks of my life. This was my community. These were my people. This was where I belonged. Nira could have her new life, whatever that looked like. Jared could start over in some other town, hopefully with lessons learned. The girls could go back to college with a better understanding of how the world really worked, and I could get back to building things instead of tearing them down. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Allie. "Love you, Dad. Thank you for being patient with us." I typed back, "Love you too, sweetheart. Always." I finished my beer and stood up to leave. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new projects, new opportunities to build something worthwhile. But tonight, I was content to savor the victory of a man who'd been knocked down, but refused to stay down. A man who'd faced the collision head-on and emerged with his integrity intact. After 23 years, I was finally free. And freedom, I was learning, tasted a lot like justice. The collision was over. The reckoning was complete. And I was still standing.